Hello everybody, my name is Grace and today I will continue reading the book Who Was Henry Ford? Chapter 6 Growing Fame. Henry Ford enjoyed the attention he received as the most successful car maker. He gave many interviews and at times he even let reporters come with him on his vacations with his friends Thomas Edison. The two famous inventors, along friends John Burroughs and Harvey Firestone, the tire manufacturer, became known as the four vagabonds. They camped in the wood while still enjoying many comforts. In 1919, Ford brought along a special truck that like a rolling kitchen with a stove and a refrigerator. A cook prepared their meals, and four of the men slept on cots with a mattress and a pillow. The four vagabonds, who were given that nicknames because they liked to roam and wander freely. They spent their time exploring nature and talked. They enjoyed chopping wood and climbing trees. The reporters who came along loved seeing the famous carmaker and his friends behaving like boys at summer camp. Being famous and having reporters around much of the time meant that Henry's options were widely published. In July 1914, war broke out in Europe. Great Britain, France, and Russia united fight Germany and its allies. The British and their allies wanted to stop Germany from controlling large parts of Europe. Henry believed that all war was wrong. He began to speak out against the fighting in Europe, which eventually became known as World War I. He even disliked talk in America preparing for war. He wrote, "Preparation for war can only end in war." In 1916, some Americans who opposed the war liked Henry's business skills, hoped he could run for the president. He said no. But 2 years later, he accepted a request from President Woodrow Wilson to run for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. Ford lost a close race. By 1918, the United States was also fighting World War I in Europe, and the Ford Motor Company was busy manufacturing Model Ts for military use and tractors for British farmers. Personally, though, Henry still opposed the war. The war years saw a different member of the Ford family begin to play a major role in the Ford Company. In 1916, Edsel took over as secretary of the board of directors, one of the top positions. He handled the company's communications and some records keeping. Around this time, Edsel married his high school sweetheart, Eleanor Clay. In 1917, they had a baby boy named Henry II. Their family grew to include two more sons, Benson and William, and a daughter, Josephine. Eleanor came from a wealthy Darrot family, and Edsel enjoyed spending time with her friends and his father. However, had never really liked the wealthy people of Darrot. He disapproved of drinking alcohol. He disapproved of people who flaunted their money. Henry believed in working hard and living a simple life. Esther liked to go to parties and museums and to golf and sell boats. To Henry, Edsel wasn't tough enough to run the Ford Motor Company. Still, Edsel was only his child. So in 1919, Henry named Edsel president of the company. Edsel soon realized that he was not really in charge. Henry would always be the one to make key decisions. Edsel rarely argued with his father because he respected him as a businessman. But he must have wondered if his father ever truly respected for him. Charles Sorensen worked closely with Henry Ford for many years. He said Ford's greatest failure achievement of Excel. Chapter 7. New Growth, New Challenges. It didn't take long for the Ford Motor Company to expand far beyond Michigan. Early as 1904, Ford made cars in Canada. He began building Model Ts in England in 1911. Dealers sold Ford cars from Russia to Brazil and many points in between. People around the world recognized the Ford name. During World War I, Ford began building a new plant outside Dearborn. It was named River Road, after a nearby river. But Henry wasn't interested in just another factory. At the River Road, he built a mini industrial city. Boats brought iron, ore, and coal into the site so the company could make its own steel. Other materials came by train or to a railway station built right into the plant. Lumber was cut out of a River Road sawmill. The lumber, coal, and iron ore all came from one land that Henry owned. By controlling all parts of production, including raw materials, and making cars in huge numbers, Henry could continue to lower the cost of Model T. With his huge fortune, Henry also bought a radio station and a newspaper, which he used to promote and sell his cars. He also wanted to share his own personal and practical ideas for making the country better. As he had made the car better, Henry called the paper the Dearborn Independent. Each issue had one article that expressed his personal opinions. Henry often spoke out against bankers and investors. He believed that they unfairly made money of others people's hard work, not by manufacturing or selling anything themselves. And some of his harshest words were directed at Jewish Americans. Articles in the Dearborn Independent said that the Jewish people, controlled by many banks and other industrials, that they were weakening the United States. Henry did not write the articles himself, but he did approve them to run in his paper. These hateful articles angered Jews and non-Jews alike. Former presidents Woodrow Wilson and William Howard Taft were among the people who spoke out against anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jews that Ford was showing. To some people, Henry's anti-Semitism reflected his lack of education. He never trusted well-educated people. He preferred the simple farmers and mechanics he had grown up with. And Ford never claimed to be a genius. He was an inventor who knew how to make and sell cars. In 1927, when Henry finally realized that he had upset Jewish Americans with the articles in the Independent, he made a public apology. By that time, the man who helped invent the modern age of mass production was thinking more about the past. Henry longed for the simpler times of his childhood. He restored the house he had grown up in several other older buildings. He began building a huge antiquity collection that included furniture, clothing, and household items from the 18th and the 19th centuries. In 1928, Henry began building the Henry Ford Museum, a few miles from his Dearborn home, to display his collections. But Henry didn't just collect any antiquities. He found historic buildings and parts of buildings and moved them to Dearborn. One was the actual courthouse where Abraham Lincoln argued several cases when he was a young lawyer. Other was the workshop where Thomas Edison had created some of his greatest inventions. Although most of the building was not original Menlo Park Lab, Henry had every detail recreated at Greenfield Village, where he placed the buildings he found. The village, next to his museum, grew to a certain more than 80 historic American buildings, while Henry focused more and more on the past. His son Axel was trying to think ahead to the future. The Ford Motor Company had been selling for only the Model T for more than 10 years. Axel's plan was to build a new car. But Henry wasn't easily convinced. It took 5 long years before he finally agreed to build the new model. He played an active role in designing it, just as he had with his first cars. In May 1927, just as the 50 millionth Model T was rolling out the door at the old Highland Park factory, the Ford Motor Company announced its new car, which had the same name as the original car, the Model A. The new Model A had windshield wipers, an automatic starter, and powerful modern features. It was also more powerful than the Model T. The Model A was an instant hit with American drivers. The car was barely more expensive than the Model T, but it was a much better car. In 1929, production of the Model A peaked more than 1.5 million cars. But then the Ford Motor Company and the rest of the United States hit a huge bump in the road, the Great Depression. After World War I, farmers and many industries were producing more goods than people could buy. They were still growing and manufacturing at the same pace they had during the war. As a consequence, during the 1920s, companies began to fire and lay off workers in large numbers. Everyone who has lost their jobs could not continue to buy new things and pay their bills. So stores and banks went out of business. Henry Ford had to lay off workers too. He cut the salaries of others. By 1923, about 3 million Americans were out of work. The Great Depression sparked new interest in labor unions that could help workers keep their jobs. Labor unions were groups of employees who sought to improve wages of working conditions. If factory owners refused their demands, the workers could threaten to strike. Refuse to work, the owners disliked strikes. They would be forced to stop production, which meant they would have no products to sell. They also didn't want workers trying to tell them how to run their businesses. Unions fought for laws that helped workers, such as shortening the workday to 8 hours. By the 1930s, workers in the auto industry wanted their own union too. New laws passed after the election of President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1923 made it easier for workers to form unions. In 1935, the United Automobile Workers Union, UAW, was formed. Henry disliked labor unions and fought having them at his factories. He didn't want anyone, investors or workers, telling him how to run his business. By 1927, Henry had hired security men to guard the Ford plant. That May, Henry's guards fought with men who tried to organize for the WAU there. Other workers acted as spies for Ford, reporting anyone who supported the unions. Ford angered many Americans with harsh treatment of his employees during the Great Depression. His support of workers starting the $5 workdays seemed long in the past. By 1941, other major automakers had allowed unions in their plants. Finally, Henry did too. Although he loved the simple ways of the past, he realized that at the time he could not always fight change. So that's the end of both chapters of Henry Ford, chapter 6 and 7, and I will see you on the last chapter tomorrow, chapter 8. Bye bye.